Good start to the month, I guess, for Ensemble Montréal. There is a new Léger poll that is out today. Sebastien Dallaire from Léger is on the line. He's Executive Vice President of Eastern Canada for Léger. Seb, if I can, just to start, obviously the thing that jumps out at you if you're the candidate here is a bit of an extension, I think, for Ensemble Montréal in terms of the leader, right, in the election. It was 20, I think, last time around, so it's 21% now for Ensemble Montréal, 12% for Projet, Craig Sauvé's transition party at 8%. I took a look at some of the breakdowns in here. They're actually quite fascinating, and I should point out this survey was conducted literally only barely a week ago, right?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Very recent.
So can you go through it for us? I mentioned 30 or 21% to 12%. There's still a month left to go, obviously a long time. The thing that, and I mentioned this earlier on, the thing that jumps out at me is the number still of undecided.
Yeah, that's really what stands out when we first take a look at this is we have a very high proportion of people who don't know yet. And so it's about 42%. We polled on this a few weeks ago. It was nearly 50%. So it's steadily going down, but it is still a very large number compared to what we typically measure. And that speaks to the overall context we're in. There's been so much politics in people's lives for the past 8 or 9 months, courtesy of Donald Trump, federal election, provincial issues also popping up. So it's been hard for candidates to really gain a lot of traction. But as you say, Ensemble Montréal, looking good for them so far.
I'm looking here at voting intentions on the second page here. What I found really interesting was you do a breakdown by age, right? Starting at 18 to 34s, male and female as well. But I see that under 55 plus, that's the widest spread. So people over 55 plus, who are typically the people who tend to vote, 8% for Luc Rabouin at Projet, 25% for Sonia Martinez-Ferreira from Ensemble. That's the biggest gap on this that I see.
It is the biggest gap. So it's a cleaner lead when we look at people who are a bit older, and from prior pollings, we could see that people who also were homeowners tended to be more favorable towards Soraya Martinez-Ferreira. So typically groups that tend to vote a little more. So it's also good news in that sense for Ensemble Montréal. And what tends to compound a little bit the issue for Luc Rabouin and Projet Montréal is that you also have a strong desire for change that has come up again and again over the past few months.
The other part of this breakdown, maybe you can explain this, because one of the other categories is East, West, and Central. So we're talking about different parts of the island and how people would vote in those parts of the island. Is that correct?
Yes, always staying within the city, of course. Okay. It's people who are eligible to vote for the Montreal election.
Right. And this, to me, again, in terms of, differences, wider differences, these are the biggest on the chart. So in the East, 8% for Luc Rabouin, 29% for Soraya. In the West, 9% for Luc Rabouin, 27% for Soraya. The only place that's even close, and it's still for Soraya, is Central, which is 18 for her, 14 for Luc Rabouin.
So where he is a bit more known, his position is a little bit stronger. But elsewhere in the city, it tends to be, Ensemble Montréal and Ms. Soraya Martinez tend to be further ahead.
So I would ask, because you've done this for a long time, we're still, as I said, a month away from an election. And I realize that as big a lead as it may be, and it's not quite double yet, but it's significant, right? Do these things tend to play out? Like, what would need to change here to kind of begin to change the numbers?
Well, since we see so many people who don't really know yet, we need to be careful. So it's right now it's a good lead. It's a strong lead. Many indicators point in the direction of Ensemble Montréal, but it tells us that voters are still kind of hesitating. They're trying to make up their minds. So it's going to depend. There's a saying that says politics doesn't like empty spaces. So it finds a way to fill the void somehow. So we'll see if a key issue or someone is able to really grab voters' attentions in the next few weeks, because something is bound to happen to make that proportion of undecided shrink significantly over the next few weeks. What is it going to be? Where is it going to land? We'll see. So far, it's looking good for Soraya Martinez-Ferreira. We'll see where we stand in a few weeks.
Seb, when you look back, in previous elections, do you actually compare to where we would have been 4 years ago when Valérie Plante was running and what the same numbers might have been back then?
Yeah, and the number of undecideds at this time would be more around 1 in 10 instead of 4 in 10. So that's a very big gap. Obviously, you don't have the incumbent running again. You don't have major stars coming in from either a leader of a party in a different political sphere, or so there's nobody that really shakes up the campaign the way we've seen in the past. So that explains the higher proportion of people who don't really know yet.
I would ask, it's funny, I was talking the other day about the fact that if we go back to 2013 when Melanie Joly decided to run against Denis Coderre, do you remember at all what it was like back then polling-wise?
Well, at the beginning, she barely registered. It was Denis Coderre had the big lead, but early on, we still had a lot of undecideds. But I believe at the beginning it was around 1/3 who didn't really know. But that group rapidly rallied behind Mélanie Joly, making that a very tight election back then. So it shows that it's possible to see a movement when you have candidates that are not really well known and people could rally behind someone. We'll see what happens. But so it's far from over. So far we have good news for Ensemble Montréal, but it's far from over.
Hey, I noticed you did not have the question, unless I must have missed it here. Who has the better posters?
No, we didn't ask that one.
I think Sarai's way ahead on the poster war, personally. But anyway, I did want to mention too, because you break this down, there's some really interesting stuff in here. You ask people questions like who would be better in your opinion, managing Montreal's public finances, fighting crime, supporting small and medium-sized businesses. If I read this right, Sarai is ahead on every single category on this list. Am I right?
Yeah, the one where it's a little bit tighter is on the environment, but generally speaking, it pretty much aligns with voting intentions. And what this tells us is because there's not so much awareness of the candidates and the policies so far, we see what we like to call a halo effect, where a party that gets a certain level of support tends to get it across the various issues. So that's what we're seeing in our results. So Ensemble Montréal and Soraya Martinez-Ferrada pretty much in the lead everywhere. Second place, Luc Rabouin, and then you have Craig Sauvé and Gilbert Thibodeau pretty much tied on most of the other ones.
By the way, I will point out on this list of, categories, like the ones I mentioned, one of them is improving relations between different communities. And the separation there is probably the starkest on the list. 20% for Soraya, 8% for Luc Rabouin.
Yeah, that's where Luc Rabouin gets the small, the smallest share. And we see, looking at results, that, for example, and that could be behind this result is Miss Martinez-Ferrada gets, she does get a bit more support among the Anglophone and the Allophone community. So that could explain why she's seen as best positioned to maybe bridge some of the gaps.
Although, just as a final point, the other one I see here that's interesting, a bit of an eye-opener, fighting crime was the category here, asking Montrealers. 19% for Soraya Martinez-Ferrada, 9% for Luc Rabouin with Projet.
But again, let's keep in mind that those are not that different from voting intentions. So we're talking about small movements, but you're right. Is Luc Rabouin a little bit less so on fighting crime? For Ensemble Montréal, it's pretty much aligned with voting intentions, but also just a little bit below. What you see is if you add people who say, I don't know, or none of them, it's 6 and 10. So, everybody has a lot to gain from being better known, because voters don't really know what they stand for.
Is this typically what you see when there are new candidates in a race? I mean, what we're seeing right now?
It's typically, but in the same way that we have a lot more people who don't know who to vote for, I think those numbers in terms of who is best positioned to deal with issues are particularly high for this stage of the race. Normally, they tend to be smaller. And again, I think it's this double effect of an overall context where people have been saturated with politics for months on end, so they haven't been paying too much attention to municipal stuff. And you have they're not star candidates in the sense of, you get someone who comes in as a federal leader or a provincial leader or an ex-mayor. You have none of that.
All right, we'll leave it at that. Sebastien Dallaire from Léger. Seb, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Take care.
Canadian women are looking for more more to themselves, their businesses, their elected leaders, and the world around them.
And that's why we're thrilled to introduce the Honest Talk podcast.
I'm Jennifer Stewart.
And I'm Catherine Clark. And in this podcast, we interview Canada's most inspiring women.
Entrepreneurs, artists, athletes, politicians, and newsmakers, all at different stages of their journey.
So if you're looking to connect, then we hope you'll join us.
Listen to the Honest Talk podcast on iHeartRadio or wherever you listen to your podcasts.